mentioned before, strong brands aren't built overnight, they're built over time. And we talked a little bit earlier about brand positioning. Basically, the strongest brands own a word or a phrase in consumers' mind. And that's what's considered in marketing theory the brand's position relative to its competitors in the marketplace, in the category or in the market where you are doing business. So think about it. What word does your brand own? Car brands are a great way to see what I'm talking about because most car brands are very much associated with one, sometimes more than one, but one word or phrase. You think of Hyundai, you think inexpensive. You think of Kia, you think really cheap. You think of Toyota, reliable. Even with all of the problems Toyota had at the beginning of the year with their brand image based on recalls and various other things, still, their brand is still considered to be reliable. It's retained that because of the power that the brand already had before that. Cadillac, luxury, BMW, performance. Think of more car brands. They all own a word. And that's our perception of them. Here's another way to look at it. If brands were people, who would you rather hang out with? Apple, Microsoft. This, like I mentioned before, is why the Mac versus PC guy commercials are so successful. It's about brand positioning. You've got Microsoft, the leader. Here's Apple, started out very much as a niche brand, a cult brand we'll talk about later for designers. Slowly but surely they expanded and positioned themselves as quite the opposite of Microsoft, and it worked. Apple today is one of the most powerful brands in the world. So how do you figure out what your brand position is? What word you want to own or should own? Well, what I usually do with my clients is I have them do what I call the brand perception snapshot. Think about what 5 words you would use to describe your brand today, and be honest. Then, think about the 5 words that your customers would use to describe your brand today. And if you have to, ask them what those words would be. And then finally, think of what 5 words you would use to describe your brand in the future. What's your ultimate goal? Where you ultimately want your brand to be? Find the gaps and fill them. Find the opportunities and seize them. So, now that we have a little bit of branding theory in mind, let's talk about how to build a brand. One of the ways that I usually break it down to clients is using what I call the ARMS theory, which is the 4 steps to brand building success. How many people in this room have heard of Twilight? Okay, then I picked a good example. So, the first process is building awareness. That's your A. People start out having no clue what your brand is, who you are. So first, you've got to build brand awareness. Then comes recognition, memory, and spreading the word. Let's look at it all a little bit more closely as it applies to Twilight, a brand everybody has heard of. So, when it comes to brand building, you've got to slow down. Remember, it takes time. Strategy first, tactics second. So, let's go through the ARMS theory for Twilight. First is the unaware stage. What's Twilight? Everyone was at that stage at one point. If you prefer, you can use another brand. You know, you can use Harry Potter. What's Twilight? You have no clue what it is. Next, you go to the awareness stage. Yeah, I've heard of Twilight. It's that vampire book. You know, you've heard of it, but you really have no connection to it. You don't really know what it is, but you've heard of it. Next, you got recognition. This is where you recognize what it is with a prompt. Someone says, have you heard of Twilight? What? That book, Twilight, about the vampires? Oh, yeah, I know what that is. Yeah, I might read that. And then next, to move up to the memory stage. This is where someone recognizes your brand without any prompting. You know, I keep hearing about Twilight. It must be good. This sounds really great. I keep hearing it. I know what it is without anyone mentioning it to me. Finally, you get to spreading the word. This person either has tried the product or is so familiar with it that they feel like they know it well. So it could come in the form of, you know, everybody, have you read Twilight? Have you heard of it? Everybody's reading it. Or the other side would be, you have to buy Twilight. I'm reading it. It's so good. I'm telling everyone. Now, here is the brand manager or business owner's dream come true. I'm telling everyone about it. Word of mouth marketing. So, now you know the 4 steps eventually, over time, build your brand. But that's not all there is to it. You have to know your competition too. When you're building a brand, your competition is just as important. You have to know them as well or better than you know yourself. You have to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis too. So you can exploit their weaknesses. You can position yourself against them. Again, owning that word, positioning your brand in the industry, building consumer expectations and creating consumer perceptions of who you are, what your brand does, and what you basically promise them. So one of the first steps as you're building your brand is looking at internal brand advocates. For those of you who have a staff in your small business, your employees are your most powerful brand advocates. Use them. Educate them about your brand. Give them a reason to want to advocate it, to want to talk about it to people, to want to defend it against naysayers, to want to spread word. If they believe in your brand promise as much as you do as a business owner, they'll want to talk about it. Use them. At the same time, you yourself, or whoever is the owner of your business, or whoever is the person who's going to step up and take on this role, need to have a brand champion and brand guardian. What do you think of when you hear names like Martha Stewart, Steve Jobs, Hugh Hefner? You think of people who basically are living embodiments of their brands. They're living embodiments of the brand promise. I wrote a book about the Playboy brand. I think Hugh Hefner is probably the best example of a brand champion and guardian ever. His story and this Playboy story from a branding perspective is so interesting and one that any business owner can learn from when it comes to having a brand champion and brand guardian who truly is the living embodiment of a brand. Think of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, probably the second best example of a brand champion and brand guardian. I'm going to talk about a couple of specific examples later in this presentation of J.K. Rowling being a great brand champion. So in the 21st century, corporations are starting a new role, which has been around for a few years now, the Chief Brand Officer. Well, you know what? You need one too. You might not call it Chief Brand Officer, but you need someone to be basically the face of the brand, the biggest cheerleader. So, we talked about building brands internally. Now let's talk about building brands externally. Remember, before we get into this, brands are built by consumers, not by companies. You have to set and meet customer expectations, or people will be confused and will turn away from your brand. Keep that in mind. So, building brand loyalty is probably every brand manager's dream come true, and probably every small business owner's dream come true. You want people to purchase again and again and again. You want people to talk about you. So brand loyalty develops when, over time, consumers' expectations for your brand are met again and again and again. They develop confidence, trust, security. They know what they're going to get when they buy from you. They choose it over any other brand. They'll travel distances to get it, and they'll talk about it. Now, you'll see here, I found this photo online. And there's Darth Vader saying, you can call me Darth, you can call me Anakin, but call me on my iPhone. Even Darth Vader is capable of building brand loyalty.